Does this Bitcoin rally have legs? Let's discuss. So hey everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to talk about this impressive rally that Bitcoin's been going on over the last few days and whether or not it might have the legs to take us up past this general resistance at around 30K that we got rejected off of back here in April and in May. So let's talk about the data and what we might look at. So the first thing I want to talk about is something I'd actually shared with Clarity Digital Pro subscribers all the way back before this even began, really right down here. And this was an observation I made about our trend confidence indicator. So first off, I want to say that if you are a Clarity Digital Pro subscriber and you're not over on the Discord or a part of the Discord exclusive channels, highly recommend you go over there and doing so. If you're not a member of those Pro member exclusive channels or not even on the Discord at all, once you're on the Discord server, just message either me, Jay, or one of the moderators and they can get you signed into the exclusive to Pro member channels. Just send over your Discord name and the email you use to sign up for the Clarity Digital Pro service just for verification, and then they can get you, either I or Jay or one of the mods can get you set up with that. And if you're interested in getting involved in Clarity Digital Pro, you can go over to our website, claritydigital.io, and sign up. It's currently just $15 a month, which we think is an absolute steal given all the data you get live access to over there. That rate is not going to stay for long, but we're going to leave it for a little while. We'll announce when that rate's going to go up. Currently $15 a month, you can lock in at that rate. But this is something I shared before this even transpired. So this is something I put out on Twitter over on the 18th. But I first shared this Clarity Digital Pro members before the signal actually even flashed. And what I noticed and what I noted to Pro members was that on Bitcoin's trend confidence indicator, so that's what this teal line is going up and down through here. One of the things that I noted was that when you see a downtrend on the TCI get broken, so basically a trend line from the relative highs of it get broken to the upside, a notable rally often will follow coming from that. And so the trend confidence indicator, if you're not familiar, it basically tells you how confident should you be in any given trend. So if you're in an uptrend and the TCI is positive, it says, this is definitely an uptrend, like right here, for example. But then as it starts to fall off, it's getting less and less confident. And so one of the ways of thinking about these downward sloping trend lines is it's got kind of a downward slope in its confidence in whatever trend you're getting in. That's getting kind of progressively less and less confident. That the max confidence it's achieving on every bounce is lower than the previous one in a predictable way, but going on these different trend lines that we can see here. So the idea is that when you get a break in that trend line, you get a break going against it, and this side, break to the upside, that means that there's something that's changing now in the trend. That instead of getting progressively less confident in, for example, there being an uptrend that's coming, now it suddenly thinks that an uptrend is forming. And that's exactly what we tend to see throughout here. And so what I noted to Pro members back here before this had even flashed was that we were doing the same thing again, that as Bitcoin was bleeding down into 24, 25K, I observed, hey, wait a minute, this looks very similar to some of these previous times. We're getting this very consistent downtrend on the TCI for Bitcoin. And then this is something we might want to watch. So if we get a break above it, that could herald in a bigger move to the upside. And indeed, that's exactly what we ended up seeing. We got that breakout. And again, that was all the way down, right around down here somewhere. And now Bitcoin is well off that mark. It was somewhere in the 25K range. So we're probably approximately somewhere around 16%, 16.5%-ish from when that signal first flashed. And so that was kind of an early warning that something like this might be possible. Another thing that I was also looking at the time, and also was talking about on the Discord, was the fact that the short-term UDPI for Bitcoin, I've also mentioned this on Twitter in the past before, kind of leading up into this, that the short-term UDPI for Bitcoin had gotten back down to the levels that we had seen preceding the last big rallies that have happened within this kind of overall move up. So, before we moved up in January, we were down at about -3. Before we moved up again in March, down about -3. And again, as we kind of gotten to this low point here, we're down -3, -2.6, that general ballpark. So if you're not familiar, the UDPI is one of our risk models that we have here. This is the short-term version of the UDPI. And so the idea is that higher values mean higher risk. That means that in the kind of days to weeks time frame, things are getting very overextended and you're likely to move down. Whereas if you're in the really low levels, that means that the kind of the sell pressure might be getting exhausted. The relative downside in the shorter term is getting relatively low versus compared to the relative upside that exists. And so we've seen that these kind of -3, -2.5 level has been acting as this kind of staging ground for rallies in this broader uptrend we've been going into. One of the things that I was mentioning, and I mentioned this on Twitter as well, even earlier than this, was that I was going to be watching this level again as being the next place where we might expect Bitcoin to find some kind of support and then find a bounce there and maybe be able to move back up. And if this rally continues, if this uptrend continues and move to higher prices, we're able to break above this, it was, a reasonable expectation to think that that might start from these kind of short-term UDPI levels. Indeed, so far, that looks like that is playing out basically again in a very similar way that it did in these last two times. And even if you just look back in the past, you see this general zone has acted as a relatively important kind of support level in the past. When you find a bottom in this level, oftentimes that's led to some uptrends following, with the more recent examples being over here. So those are two pieces of data that I was watching that were telling me that an uptrend here, a move up, was a very reasonable expectation to hold, that it was not going to be totally surprising. And then, of course, with the catalyst being all the news about the BlackRock ETF, and then now with everything else that's come out, other big institutions like Fidelity announcing plans for Bitcoin ETFs, and then also the Citadel-backed exchange, going live, all these different kind of things suggesting institutional interest in Bitcoin. It's not really surprising that that was the catalyst that could then make this setup start to play out. And so again, this is really why we have models, because going into this point, you might recall that once we were down here, the mood on crypto Twitter, on YouTube, was very bearish. Everyone was saying Bitcoin was going down to 20K or lower. Not many people were saying that Bitcoin is going to be rallying from here. There were people who were calling for higher prices before who capitulated, said, I was wrong. This rally is definitely over. We're going lower. And I actually tweeted out back here on the 15th that it was kind of surprising, it's kind of weird in some ways that there was so much gloom and doom when a lot of the kind of medium to long-term data was looking quite bullish. And so that was another thing that was telling me this was a potentially contrarian signal, and that this wasn't maybe a very rational way to be thinking about the market at that point, to be so gloomy based on everything that was going on underlying, all the underlying data that we had. And then, of course, here we go, ripping off to the upside. So a broader point then is this is why we have models, and I've talked about this before, that emotion tends to be a horrific way of navigating markets, because it'll tell you to do the opposite of oftentimes what is advantageous. It will tell you to get really excited at these local highs and think that Bitcoin is going to go ripping off to 50K, and then it just kind of bleeds out, and then it gets you to panic down at 24, 25K, sell out, just for it to reverse ripping off to the upside once again. And so that's basically what we do here at Upside Down Data, and what we do at Clarity Digital is we have models, we have data that don't care about our emotions, don't take that into consideration at all. They just look at what's going on and give their estimate, give their belief about what might be going on. So then you can catch these signals that tend to have predictive value and ignore those emotions that are telling the exact opposite, and then oftentimes end up being wrong. So obviously not financial advice. You should make of these data as you will, etc., etc. But that's just one thing that personally for me, it's why I like to navigate these markets with models, with objective data that don't care about what I'm thinking or what I'm feeling, are just going to tell me how it is from their kind of cold, logical perspective. Okay, so if we have now gotten this rally, and if it could have legs, which it looks like it very well could, given the fact that it's, for example, coming off of these same short-term UDPI levels that have led to notable rallies in the past. What I want to talk about next then is what makes be some reasonable upside targets for this rally. And I actually want to rely on some on-chain data for this particular analysis. So I've showed this before here. This is the distribution of realized price for Bitcoin. So if you're not familiar, realized price is basically the price at which one person spent Bitcoin, and then it becomes the cost basis of whoever bought that Bitcoin. If I sell it, someone became the buyer, and then that realized price becomes their cost basis. And the reason we care about a cost basis is that it often can act as an important level for people. We know from psychological theory, prospect theory, that people pay a lot of attention to movement when it's right around their break-even point, that 0 point between profit and loss. So the idea is that as price nears someone's cost basis, they're going to psychologically feel that movement more powerfully. It's going to have a bigger psychological impact on them than if, for example, the price was way above their cost basis, fluctuating around a bit. People aren't really going to pay as much attention, or way below their cost basis, fluctuating around, where people are saying, well, it's still so far away, I'm not really paying much attention. It's really when you're getting really close that it can matter. And then the idea is that if you're rising into cost basis, some people might decide they're paying attention because it's getting close to their cost basis, then they might just decide, all right, I'm at break even, I'm just going to sell here. I didn't like the feeling when it went low. People are generally loss averse, so I'm just going to get out and go ahead and cash in. And then vice versa, if price is falling into cost basis, people can then be paying a lot of attention. If they thought it was a good value to be buying it at the first time, then they might see it as a good value to buy it the second time back down at that level and then invest more to defend that cost basis. So that's kind of the logic behind why cost basis can be important to watch for support and resistance levels. And what this is showing us, this chart here, is where are the cost bases at, how many Bitcoin have their cost basis at a given price, basically. So around 30K, this, we have roughly this many Bitcoin that have their cost basis there. But 40K, we have this many. And I should note that I'm filtering out anything that's kind of, the short-term holders are being filtered out, basically. So anyone who's been holding Bitcoin for less than 6 months, not worrying about them. And the idea there is that their cost basis might matter a little bit less because they're just buying in and out anyway. They're buying into Bitcoin, selling out of Bitcoin. They're not really kind of holding with any kind of conviction. And so it's maybe less meaningful to watch them versus the longer-term holders who might be, a little bit more committed to their cost basis in one way or the other. And so what we can see is that the first kind of blip above where we are right now, which is around 29K, is that we're starting to just get into this first little blip of cost basis here around 30K. So that's the first thing that we can note here, is we're kind of getting involved with this area. And so there might be some reason to expect that Bitcoin slows down at around this level. It might not, it might clear right through it, but there might be some changing of hands that happens here, where people who bought in here, at least 6 months ago, if not more, so that would really be the people who bought into Bitcoin, all the way back, all the way really back here probably, or even longer back there, who might decide this is a good time to cash out after having watched this whole thing happen. And so there might be some changing of hands happens there, and that's going to be the kind of the first test for the bulls, is there enough new demand and buy pressure to outweigh the potential sell pressure that might show up from this cohort. That's one thing that we have to keep in mind. Of course, it's also possible that people here, given the new bullish narratives with Bitcoin with the institutional interest, might decide that, even though they endured all this pain, going down all the way, through this whole experience and back up to here, might say, you know what, I'm still going to hold and wait for higher prices. That's also possible. So we're going to have to get through that kind of blip. Then it kind of tapers out a bit. There's not quite as much. There still is cost basis through here, but it's a little bit less. And really the next big spike we see is as we get up into the higher 30Ks and into 40Ks, we see a nice big move up here. And that's where, for me, I think that if Bitcoin can clear this resistance, if it can clear above this level, I'm actually personally really going to be watching this general level here. As we get up into kind of this zone up here, 37K to 40K, that's where I might be expecting a more notable top to form. And one of the things that very well might happen at that point is that all the bears, all the people disbelieving this rally so far and thinking that this is just going to roll over and go down to lower prices, by the time we get up to those levels, a lot of them might have actually ended up capitulating out. The sentiment might flip very bullish. People, you might see people saying new all-time highs are imminent. It's only just a very short matter of time before we're up there. And then, of course, as I was just talking about, like in this tweet, once the herd starts getting, well, actually not in this tweet, but basically this idea of sentiment, once the herd starts getting a little bit too extreme on one side versus the other, then things might be getting concerning. Now, obviously, it'd be up to the data. I'd be watching our models to see what they think once we get up to there in terms of if it's how plausible it is for us to continue to pushing up. But if the models start getting concerned and if we start getting that momentum really shift in the extreme bullish side, that might actually be a bunch of different signals that could indicate a local top forming there. Obviously, that's just speculation at this point. We have to see what actually would transpire up there if we get there. But that's one of the things I'd be looking at. And it wouldn't surprise me to get something to play out, something sort of like a stretched out and a little bit lower volatility 2019 or less extreme 2019, where we get up to that kind of level where we're retracing a lot of the drawdown from the prior all-time high. People get really bullish all of a sudden. Everyone thinks we're going to the moon. We're off to new all-time highs. And then we actually have a bleed out before potentially, being able to continue a bull run after that, broader markets willing that we don't enter into some nasty recession or something like that. But that's kind of one of the things that I'm thinking about is a more speculative kind of thought. And again, that's not saying that's necessarily my base case. A lot of it's going to depend on what the data looks like at that point. But it's a hypothesis that I've been thinking about really ever since the beginning of this rally, that pushing up to some of these levels would not be unreasonable. I actually put out a video a good while ago where I actually did some simulations with the UDPI, and we were talking about how this level would be a reasonable place to expect a maybe local top, assuming Bitcoin can't clear off two new all-time highs, which is definitely not my base case at this point. And the way that things are stacking up right now, it seems plausible that that kind of thing could play out. So, time will tell. We're going to have to watch this closely. I think as Bitcoin gets up into these levels, it's going to be really important to watch how it interacts with this local resistance, especially since we know some people have their cost basis there. But given the fact that we should, in theory, have a decent amount of short-term upside potential to work with, I think unless something kind of changes in the market, like some big SEC news that rugs us again, or some completely new thing that really kind of derails this whole narrative, I do think it's reasonable to think that this could continue higher. And so that's kind of where I'm standing right now. Obviously, with crypto, anything is possible, but that's what I'm looking at right now. That the data for me are currently telling me up might be the more kind of reasonable expectation than down. At least that's my current outlook. All right, so obviously it's not financial advice. You should make of these data as you will, of this information as you will, and do whatever you think that makes the most sense. That's just where I'm sitting right now. So to wrap us up, if you're interested in getting involved in Polarity Digital Pro, you can go over to our website, polaritydigital.io, link in the description. Again, $15 a month to lock in, and basically that rate would be locked in until you'd unsubscribe. The price will be going up. We think that $15 is an absolute bargain value for all the data that you're getting. And, we've seen how these data have been useful guides to the market time and time again. So I wanted to give a shout out there. And then, of course, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter. Put a lot of updates about the market and our indicators over there.